Good morning, and thank you for welcoming me. So I think in this presentation, I would start it by the words of my statistics professor, actually, who said, you know, Hannah, statistics is sometimes like a bikini. It uncovers a lot, but it can cover the important parts. And so when it comes to the numbers, if I can just get the clicker for the next slide, it is, thank you. It is with great delight to say that I don't know how to operate the slide. Big green button, I have pressed it. There is no green button on the top. There we go. So, in opening up the bikini line, what I'm trying to say is I'm going to present a lot of statistics, but these statistics might need a bigger and deeper conversation behind them, okay? And this is why I'm so excited about a panel. The data I'm presenting is from PitchBook. It has been collected since 2019 onwards. And in doing so, we were looking at seed and early stage rounds and wanted to look at it through a gender lens, getting an understanding of who's getting funded, in which countries, in what kinds of valuations and what kinds of deal sizes, okay? And we wanted to look at it in a different way, not just looking at male only versus those other teams with some diversity in them. We wanted to look at it also understanding the diverse teams in more depth. Key finding doesn't surprise you maybe, the dominated deal flow is going to male-only teams, so 75% of the teams are male-only. Big message, I think, is though that Europe, as opposed to the US, actually has more diverse teams. And if you look at this in more detail, this 20% of the heterogeneous teams are actually speaking some big messages. So on one hand, they're saying that about half of the female founders in Europe are housed in teams led by male CEOs. But if you look at the actual absolute numbers, what I think is even more interesting is we're seeing that we have about equal numbers of teams which are diverse when it comes to gender, but some have successfully chosen a male CEO to lead them, and others have chosen a female CEO. So I think we really need to understand more from these kinds of diversity and see how they can shape the landscape in Europe. On the big picture, the distribution of these teams, geographically, London is by far leading the pack. So it's almost 50% of female-founded teams that we're finding in London. There's a lot to learn from the diverse ecosystem there, and some amazing panelists will share more on that. But behind that, I think it's also important to mention some other locations where the actual density of female-funded deals is topping the charts. So around 15% happening in Tallinn, Stockholm, and Dublin. Some bad news, I guess, when it comes to where does the money go. We're still seeing disproportionate amount of money flowing to early stage, especially male-only teams, whereas only 2% of the capital was going to female-only teams. However, we are still fairly comparable to what you would see in the US, so there's definitely more room to grow, especially the message for the investors in the room. The next thing we wanted to understand was deal size. It's important, of course, to look at industry verticals. We try to dissect the numbers as best as we can to make sure we have representations of all categories of founders across them. What you're seeing on the slide is healthcare versus IT, B2B, and B2C. And what you see typically as a pattern in the data is that male-only teams get the highest median deal size, all the way stacked down to female-only teams. Bad news. Silver lining, there are verticals when you're seeing that the median deal size is actually topping the charts. So in B2B, we have seen an amazing upturn for female-only teams, both in UK and in France and Germany. There are a lot of good deals being made, and there's things we can learn from them. Last message goes to valuations. This is where you see the bullish year of 2021, both in seed and in early stage deals, creating this incredible uptick, disproportionately more so for the male-only teams, so something to be mindful of. And when it comes to the years, it's important to see that, you know, there were years such as 2020 when, at least in the seed stages, the orange buckets, the female-led companies, were actually comparable in valuations to the male-only companies. However, in this bullish 2021, things have restacked again, and especially in the early stage deals, you're seeing this red circle, which is this growing gender gap that I think is worth a conversation to address. If there are 3 messages to take away, know how to operate a clicker. At the same time, make sure that you appreciate the diversity that Europe comes with, because we do have more diverse teams and more better starting base to start from, that there are gaps, but that the gaps are importantly and differently shaped across stages and across industry verticals, so we can have a conversation there. And finally, for the founders in the room, I hope that this informs you a little bit, at least when it comes to thinking about CEO decisions and when it comes to thinking about location choices, where Vienna obviously offers a great conversation to all of us and to learn from. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanna, for this presentation. We have a lot to discuss. Welcome from my side, Dan Jovicevic. I'm the founder of Broadcasten. We're very happy to be partnering as a media company and supporting the team in digital implementation of this event, and obviously leading this exciting panel. We have 4 more speakers with us today. I'd like to welcome them on stage. Rita Villas-Boas, LP founder at Schilling, board member at Ignae. She's also founded the political party in Portugal, which is represented in the parliament because she wanted to move and change things. Very welcome, and a big round of applause. With us, Tanja Spenlingwimmer, Head of IP Management, Deep Tech and Entrepreneurship at Austria Wirtschaftsservice. She's new in this position and already moving a lot. Tanja, very welcome, and a big round of applause. With us is also Depali Nangya, partner at Speedinvest, co-founder of Alma Angels, angel investor and angel investor of the year in the UK. Very good to have you here, Depali. Welcome, and a big round of applause. And last but not least, Mayra Frank, Google for Startups, DACH lead at Google. Great to have you with us. Welcome on stage. Come and join us. So we want to discuss quite a few topics. We want to discuss the European startup ecosystem. We want to discuss geopolitics, and obviously we want to discuss diversity, which will be our main focus. But let's start maybe with a short intro into the status quo at the European ecosystem. Rita, you used to live in China as well. You have an international overview of the situation, so to say. Where are we now, and how can we make our ecosystem in Europe more competitive in the international landscape?
Well, I think in Europe, we already start in a different position than if we want to compare with China or USA, because we're not one country. We are we are so many nations. And so the diversity, which is a very good thing, like we say, we're so diverse, but that also is an obstacle, culturally, linguistic. So from my take is that we need to make it simplify, less bureaucracy, we need to make Europe easier and friendlier place to do business.
But do you see assets that we have as well compared to other ecosystems? What is good in Europe, and what can we improve in particular? Maybe.
Well, I think probably UK is the country where is more integrated. If you see the financial markets, strong stock market, the language, very close to America, and I think the specialization, it's very hard to define a city in Europe where we're verticalized and very focused, whether it's fintech or deep tech, except UK. And then you have, analysts, specialty by any fund. So I think we should specialize ourselves more.
I just can add that we are still very traditional here in Europe, particularly in Austria or also in Germany and the other German-speaking countries. And that means that we have a kind of lack here on the capital market, and that's also the reason why we have to be very good with government funding. And I think that's a strength, particularly in Austria, that we provide a lot of government funding for startups and scale-ups and spin-offs.
I was going to add that I think more European pension funds should invest in venture capital as an asset class, because if you compare to America, we are much, much smaller. And if we can do that, we can have much more later stage capital, because we're quite, we're not as deep in terms of liquidity, in terms of Series C and Series D. We can also have more tax incentives. The UK has done this very well for early stage investing, have more tax incentives, have more grants, so we can have more, people have early stage funding when angel capital, VC capital is not available in those really, really early stages. I think grant funding can really help.
Are we too dependent on capital out of maybe US and China and other parts of the world? We've been talking about dependencies a lot in the pandemic on different levels, resources, digitalization, and so on. Are we also depending on the capital, which is not European?
I mean, of course, we are dependent on the US, right? But I would think that US, if you look at capital inflows, has gone up and down over the last few years. So it goes up, goes down, but we are dependent on the whole world, really, to be honest. If you look at what's happening right now in terms of, the war, COVID, supply chain disruption, I don't think because we are now a global economy, for want of a better word, everything is open, and we are dependent on the US, but I think that we are also developing a lot of capital, which is why the pension fund conversation comes in, right? If we have more capital, less dependency, it's always better.
Do you see things moving here? Any of you? Maybe policies?
Of course, and I just want to add a point. I think we would have a lot of capital here, particularly also in Austria. Like, we have a really good companies, family-owned companies, and they still invest more of their capital in real estate than in innovative startups, and I think that needs to change. So we really have to release that capital also for innovative startups, particularly, hopefully, also for female-led startups. And I have the hope that there is a change in progress, because now a lot of these institutions, these corporations are changing into the next generation. There are also more women in the C-levels of these companies, and I hope that then also more capital will be released for startups, for entrepreneurial spirit.
And maybe one thing to add, I think we will talk about diversity in a minute, but I think one thing about Europe that is great as well is that we have a lot of planet, companies that are really good for the planet and sustainable startups. We have a lot of purpose-driven businesses, and I think there Europe really exceeds as a world leader, which is a really exciting space as well.
Could Europe be the leader in terms of female entrepreneurship, female founders? Could we position ourselves as the hub where female founders can be successful, more successful maybe than in other ecosystems?
Well, we need to be less risk adverse. In Europe, we're so conservative in a way that we don't like risk. And when Chinese or Americans, especially West Coast, people are so, they drive risk averse, and we can teach this. You can train it. So we need to be more, let's take chances. So if we do that, yes, absolutely, because we know that funds and investment towards women is more riskier because there's no such a history. So if we do that, we can leap and invest more, and we could be number one.
I was just going to add that there are a lot of cultural barriers, and you can't look at Europe as, one unit, because, the UK, France, Benelux, Ireland, this is where 60% of VC is invested right now, right? And their regions, their pockets. CEE has a lot of talent, but not a lot of capital. Spain is a very young tech ecosystem. So I think you have to look more broadly than just Europe, and I think there are regions that are still very behind. I was in Poland, like I mentioned, and a female founder said to me that, I got a term sheet which said that if I have a child, then my equity will have to restart in terms of vesting. I mean, that is not acceptable. And how can you become the leader in female entrepreneurship if you have things like that?
Crazy. Before we deep dive into the diversity topic, let's just touch the geopolitics. What's the situation on the market? We hear so many things, so many predictions. Dipali, what's your take on that?
I wish there was a magic mirror. I think we have to maybe pause a bit, just like after COVID, for a few months in the summer, see what happens. We have a lot of dependencies, whether it's commodities, whether it's energy. There's a lot of pressure on, consumption is very high, inflation is very high. Anytime that happens, interest rates have to go up to reduce consumption, right? Capital flows just slow down. People want to take a breather. There's flight to quality. Metrics become fashionable again. Almost for investment, I think it's a very good time. We are raising our fourth fund at Speed Invest. Very excited that we'll be going into a market, hopefully with better valuations. But I wish I could predict the future. But I think we need to maybe this is good that we have a pause at this point.
And I would also argue it's actually because, to your question, right, it's an amazing time for female founders, because, and we'll talk about it in a minute, right, but female founders have to be way more resourceful because they have less access to capital. And especially now when capital is slowing down, this might, as a theory, affect female founders less because we always had to be more resourceful.
As long as they get funded.
But I think it's also important to set the right framework from a policy side, and particularly that's what we are doing. So we actually want to help to get more female entrepreneurships within the startups. So if you want to have, for example, the full amount of funding, you need to have at least 25% of the founders should be women. So that's very, very important also to make these kind of rules in order to fuel female entrepreneurship. Yeah,
I agree. We have at Speed Invest, I think our last fund was 23% mixed teams, and we have a 30% target. So I think target setting is very, very important.
Is there a hard KPI that you measure?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
100%.
What happens if you don't achieve it?
I don't know. As in, of course, I'm hoping that we'll go over 30%. I'm hoping that there is no role for a person like me, because my focus is female founders. I'm hoping that every team does their bit on female founders. But of course, there are fewer female founders in industrial tech, for instance, right? So they can't have the same KPI as the health team. So you just have to be more realistic in target setting as well.
We also have a certain KPI in that regard. We know that there are like 17% of all Austrian startups having like female teams or just women within the teams or mixed teams, and with us we have around like 20%. So it's not a lot, yeah, but we try to bring that up maybe to 30 to 35, even 50%. That would be nice, and that's something what we hope to achieve within the next years.
Hannah?
So this would have been my question, because I think it's amazing to see that some of the best practices that we know from research in terms of how to actually promote diversity, right, which is a design choice. It's not just about trying to debias people, it's not just about values or attitudes, but it's a really design choice of what you measure, of who you put into place, how the deals are sourced, etc. And so what I'm curious about is maybe for the audience, if you can share some of these. I stole your role as a moderator.
Perfect.
I'm sorry.
Perfect.
But if you can share some of these best practices and also what the LPs are thinking, right?
Absolutely.
How is up the chain?
Happy to share. So even before I joined Speed Invest, actually, I think we are quite forward thinking as a fund. We had put together a working group just for diversity, inclusion, to make sure we were thinking not just externally, but internally about our own policies and how we were looking at, pay gaps within the organization, promotion when it comes to women versus men, recruitment. And, every time we got a few CVs, we would be like, let's see if we can find women for the role. So not just take the first, man who comes and is really good, but really make an effort, design, choice really to go out and find women. And so for the last 12 to 18 months, we've only recruited women, for instance, in all investment roles. Also, we measure everything probably. We have a monthly report where we measure the number of women that apply, how that moves from if it's a lead, how it moves from long list to short list to investment committee, and how that conversion funnel is looking.
Is this number increasing?
I mean, it depends. I mean, you can't just say that. I'm hoping that because I'm there also, it's making a difference, right? Because you need to have women in leadership roles so women can approach you. The fun, if a woman looks at a web page, if I look at a web page with like 5 men as partners, then I'm probably less likely to approach, right? So over time, I would see, I joined the fund full time as a partner this year. I was a venture partner. Over time, you would see that it's increasing, assuming that there are more female-founded businesses being founded as well, right? Which is on the uptake, but maybe COVID had a bit of an impact there. And again, it depends on team by team, but we measure it team by team, right? And we see why, I think in teams such as consumer marketplaces, healthcare, this is where a lot of female climate, a lot of female VC. So we're definitely seeing those trends. But we measure this monthly. We meet monthly. We set up a mentoring program for women on the team, operational. We get together as women in the team and discuss topics, really intimate, vulnerable topics. So as a fund, we're doing a lot internally as well as externally.
Tanya, you, I think, made one measure that in the juries that where startups implement, you have more women in the juries as well.
Yes, that's also one thing that we really want to have a kind of equal juries set up. So we try to have equal women as men in the juries because that's very important. And for us, it's also important to have a more diverse jury. So to have people from abroad as well as Austrians, of people of different ages, because that really makes an impact on the startups that are then selected and recommended to get grants.
Yeah, and I would just say I think this is a whole together a fantastic set of things, and I would just advertise there's a whole list of best practices of how to design VC processes, both on hiring female partners on that level, but also on deal flow. And one of the things, for example, that research is showing, it's not just enough to have diverse jury in terms of biases. We are all biased, women and men alike, in terms of what we're looking for in a founder. So what also helps is, on one hand, to make first individual decisions before doing a group discussion, because groupthink can sometimes prevail, also because sometimes men are louder at the table and therefore sort of hijack the discussion. So making individual decision first helps. And then the other thing that really helps is not to evaluate one founder at a time, but to do comparisons directly. This sort of makes things more objective in terms of the analysis. So there are very specific and very simple things you can do to try to at least bring awareness to the process.
We'll discuss the biases in a second, but just to close the geopolitics, Rita, what do you advise founders to do at this point in time when we have uncertainty, when we read so many things, Y Combinator giving advice, Sequoia giving advice? What should they do?
I think the advantage of Europe, well, at least from my point of view, from South Europe, is that in the last years we didn't increase the devaluations like in the US. Right? So I think we're starting already with very, feet in the ground, and I think that's already a competitive advantage. Now, will it be hard for male or female to find? I think the good ideas and good projects will always find their way. So I think we need to attract more money to Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mara, you mentioned something very interesting. Let's talk about this briefly, that this could be a good time for female leadership or female founders because they might be more resourceful, more prudent in this situation. Do you see this in your portfolios? Is this a good time for female leadership in the future? Is it just hypothesis, or do we have proofs already?
Oh, I mean, it's the best time for female leaders because we don't have enough, and there's so much potential, right? There's like a huge gap that is still untapped, and I think, our team almost exclusively works with female founders, women founders, for the last 4+ years now, and I think, while the stats are not with us because we're still, as we heard, only at 1.8%, I think, in terms of like the total VC funding going to all female teams, I think we are seeing a great, development in the ecosystem. There's amazing founders. We just hosted a dinner with 30 of them yesterday that are all pitching here, so check out the pitch stage as well. They're amazing. There's like an amazing network. I think they're doing great things, and I think there's like a lot of power behind the ones that are there. I think we just have to make all our part to, give them the visibility that they need, give them access to funding, give them the right networks, and make sure that they actually get what they need to grow their businesses.
Rita.
It's not a moral condition to have female in leadership. It is proven that women in leadership roles are better in crisis, which is right now. We deploy better stock for shareholders. There's McKinsey, BCG studies that saying that this is not us. It is proven. There is data. So why are we waiting for?
Mm-hmm. But I was going to ask just before we move on, actually, maybe somebody is wondering also who is watching us online, why is this gender discussion important? Is it a moral discussion that we're having here, or is it business relevant?
Absolutely.
Women tend to, you're the 50% of the population, right? So you can't really ignore them, tend to build for problems they've had, whether it's education for their children, or nutrition, or mental health, or climate, or, problems of women's health that they've suffered. You can't definitely not, avoid building in these categories because they're huge categories. It's like an arbitrage opportunity for me when I look at these businesses because there's little capital flow going into them. They're great business ideas with huge potential, large market. So it makes a lot of business sense.
And I think, it's absolutely critical that we're having those conversations. We were, debating a lot whether we should have even female-led programs or focused programs. Should it not be programs where you have equal representation, right? Should you have an all-female panel talking about, the state of the women ecosystem, But the answer is, if now, and I actually wrote it down from the Women in VC report that we just launched, if the current growth trajectory continues the way it does, we will take 135 years plus to be at an equal level between male and female. So if you're not having those conversations and we're not making that effort, nothing is going to change. And as we heard, female-led businesses or mixed businesses, are more profitable. So there's a lot of economic reasons to really pay attention to this, and we have to start now.
This report just came out last week, I think.
Yes.
Could you just give us some insights on the key takeaways from it?
Basically, we are really in a desolate state still. I think that's maybe bottom line. No, but I think we heard some numbers from Hannah as well. They're mostly the same. So you have like, huge, obviously gender gap, both in the startup ecosystem still, but also in the VC ecosystem. I think, Deepali, you mentioned a little bit, but I think shocking is, like how many women are represented at partner level at a VC companies. We have like 85% male partners versus 15% female partners. And I think what was interesting, though, it's not only the numbers we have to pay attention to, so it's not only about getting more women into those positions, because what we hear also from our founders is, they're having these conversations with male founders, and they tactically send their male co-founders or male counterparts into these conversations because they feel like, it will land better, or, numbers conversations or fundraising conversations will be more efficient and more promising if the woman on the table is not involved directly, which is shocking, and really, really annoying to hear, right? But I think, what we need to ensure is not only that there's women on the other side of the table, but they also have the decision-making power and actually the capital and the power, to actually, give the funding, which currently, and that's also one thing that the report uncovered, right, is that currently, you don't have the same investment power even on a partner level with female VCs.
Seriously?
So that's something that is that obviously needs to change.
Many don't have carried interest. Many don't own the management company. I think there are 15% female GPs, but they really have 5% that they really control in capital. Many actually are just partners in name.
Okay. And I think you mentioned that 50%, I'm not sure, of the female teams are based in London, in Europe. Why is that? What are they doing better than the rest of Europe? Do we have some insights on that?
Well, I don't have, but I think you have people on the panel who are actually actively contributing to that. And actually, one of my former students, we've discovered a mutual connection.
What I've found interesting about England is that a lot of women who were in VCs realized that they really can't see a path to partnership. So they left and they started angel investing and started doing their own micro VCs. So I've seen this huge, growth in micro VCs, female-led funds, which I actually have seen one in Germany now. There's OXO, right? But I've not really seen that in the rest of Europe. So definitely, and then I just feel maybe it's a slightly more advanced ecosystem, just more generally, culturally, it's slightly more advanced, right?
What impact did the pandemic have on the diversity in tech and startups and funding? Was it positive, negative?
So I can share a little bit. It's unpublished research and it's not mine, but it looked like good research, so I'm happy to share it. So it was fascinating to see that after the financial crisis of 2008, you actually had a pro-women bias in the investor community, and the way that they explain it is with an experiment in which they show that values of aggression, competition, go, conquer, etc., that were attributed to a sort of risk-taking financial mindset that got us into the financial crisis were sort of devalued, and the values of resourcefulness, collaboration, mindfulness, sustainable growth, etc., that are more typified of female entrepreneurs came through. COVID reversed that. Oh. So what happened in COVID, and there will be also other things like work-life balance and child caring and the roles, but in COVID the explanation would go that this exogenous uncertainty that came from the craziness outside of the financial system that we cannot explain actually portrayed a shift towards valuing, again, this daring, risk-taking, go against the wall type of a mindset, which is more associated with a male type than with a female type.
And I would add that you would then tend to invest in something you know already. Do you know what I mean? As a man, then you would be more open to investing into a man or a second-time founder, because then you're now doing it over Zoom and you just don't have, it's not flight to quality, it's but flight to the known, or what is known to you is what probably happened. But, there were some women who said to me, Zoom was great. A, I could reach investors I have never been able to reach because I could not physically meet them. And two, they never knew I was pregnant when I was fundraising, which was the best part.
How big is this issue? Yeah, at first I laughed and then I cried after I heard this. So let's talk about this. How big is the issue of pregnancy when female founders are raising?
I can only talk anecdotally from founders that I know that have had term sheets pulled. I have a female founder I invested in. She actually took her company public last year. She was very blatantly asked. I even put this in a blog because she told me this up front when I did an interview with her. She was like, I was asked very clearly when I was fundraising by men that, how can you raise a family? I was pregnant. How can you have a child and build a company at the same time? So it is something that comes up over and over again, never with a man, but always with a woman.
And you mentioned the term sheet from Poland where it stated that in case the woman is pregnant, she will lose her vesting period.
And investing will have to restart. This is what a Polish female founder said to me last week, that she got a term sheet in Poland which said this.
So we have work to do. We have work to do.
It's a huge issue. I mean, we like our alumni founders, all of them. I mean, we can't really name sources because it's such a big topic. You know, like everyone like feels so much pressure. You know, like because it is obviously when you're founding, you're in your early late 30s, the majority, right? So this is a topic. So one of the first questions that many of our founders get asked in VC conversation is about family planning, actually, which is outrageous, right? And the male founders, I'm not sure, but I would argue that they probably rarely hear that question, right? Like, and they have to, like justify it. And many founders, like they get really stressed because they don't know how to actually do with those conversations, right? Like, how do you deal with it? Because you obviously have a life. And we would also argue we have many founders in our community who are mothers, many male founders as well who are fathers, right? We would probably argue they are way more resourceful because they have to manage so many things, and they're actually better at managing multiple work streams, both at home but also in the startup life, So I would also argue, is it really a disadvantage, that you start to think about starting a family in that time of your career? But it is totally a huge issue when you're fundraising, and that's certainly something that needs to be.
And Hannah, the generations are changing.
So this is exactly what I wanted to mention. So at the Technical University of Munich, we have a lot of male-founded teams also, and what's interesting is as they sort of grow into becoming fathers as well, I think this is now a question that investors should either ask all entrepreneurs, male and female alike, because this is not a generation that wants to just leave the baby at home. They want to be engaged and active fathers, and same kinds of questions actually start applying, I think, with the generation that's coming out.
Rita, do you think it will become more difficult, even more difficult for women to fundraise in the upcoming months and years?
Look, as a liberal, I should be, most of us, we should be against these quotas. And throughout the years, I realized that we need to force the quota until we are at least 30 to 40%.
It doesn't work without it.
Because it doesn't work without it.
100%.
And this is a big discussion we have even in my party, because theoretically, it's true, we should have meritocracy, it's easy. Even women, we are the ones already doing the bias. We see this in the studies. We are asking different questions to women and men, so we have to really force ourselves to sometimes be positive discrimination. We have to. And we only can find and fund more women if we have more women investing in women. So we need to.
Very good. I think you opened another important topic that we can discuss in the remaining 10 minutes, the question of biases and how to deal with them. How many are subconscious biases and how can you eliminate them? Because you mentioned yourself, not everybody is kind of, let's talk about it childishly, mean person, but it's subconscious biases. Dipali, you guys at Speed Invest are dealing with that on a structural level.
Yeah,
How?
we did actually unconscious bias training, and we will continue to do it over the years because biases take very long. I'm sure I have some biases too, right? Everybody grows up with biases. You are just most comfortable with what you know. So it's not a bad thing. It's just how to figure out how to deal with it and the type of questions that women get asked, including about family and, those kinds of things should not be happening anymore. But it's through training, it's through, I think, osmosis, through diversity in leadership teams, through making sure that the leader at the company is sending this message, because if the leader at the company is not sending it, nobody really cares about it. So we have that very strongly, from our own managing partner, which is why it takes time to trickle down.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just quickly follow up with also an important point, because research shows that if you just do debiasing trainings, it can actually backfire. Because what happens is that the people go, oh, I'm just human. Cool, okay. So I don't even have to try, because how can I work against my subconsciousness? So this is really a dangerous point. If you're just doing a debiasing training, it's not enough. So following up with the kinds of interventions you're talking about, commitment from leadership on the top, design choices in how you actually organize task forces, metrics, etc., then it works out.
Setting and measuring the KPIs.
Then it works out, yeah.
Tanya, public policies?
Yeah, but what I think is we have to have a bigger view. So it's also that we have to start already at the childhood level to fight against these biases. So really to train already children to be more open-minded and to invest also more time in entrepreneurial thinking and to be more engaged, like in startup trainings already on school level. We also have a kind of award taking place for school projects that is awarded tomorrow, so everyone is welcome to come, because I think that's really, really important also from a policy level to focus already on the kids and to conquer that bias thinking.
I think you're, in general, putting a lot of efforts in the public policies to eliminate these biases, be it in the jury or other measures. Could you give us some further insights on that?
Yeah, as you already mentioned, so we try to have really a kind of diverse jury setup. We also try, of course, to give bonuses if female founders are within the founding team. We try to also bring programs into life that are maybe more attractive for female founders, because we have, in the past, we really focused more on deep tech, on high technology, pre-seed and seed financing, and we now came up with a new program that is working with innovative solutions. And we know, of course, that can also already be a bias, but we know in Austria at least that many women are in like fields like health, healthcare, education, edutech, and so on. And we also want to particularly give these women the chance to get also grants and funding from us.
Hannah, I think you mentioned guidelines for VCs on how to reduce biases. How many of you know that that exists? So we should link that document somewhere.
Absolutely.
And Debali, what's your kind of estimate? How many VCs know that this document exists?
I didn't know it. We have set our own policies and procedures, but I didn't know about this document. But we do know about Diversity VC. You know, we're going through their certification. It's a UK, where they have level 1, level 2, and you have to do a certain number of things in the organization to get those certifications. So that's what we are following.
Rita, do you try to eliminate your personal biases when investing?
Every day, every day. You need to. This is something that you need to practice every day and remind yourself. Do you see was it the female 8th of March International Female Day? There was this campaign in UK where there's like outdoors, and there was like, oh, think of a CEO. Is it a man? Think of a nurse. Is it a woman? So we all have this, and we think about it. Like there's another joke, like the kid is going to a first interview in a company, and the dad is driving him to the interview. There's a phone call, and the CEO of the company calls him, say, good luck. It was the mother. And so many people don't think like, oh, why would the mother call him like she's the CEO? Yes, she's the CEO. So we need to think and always force ourselves to make positive questions and remove that bias that is coming from when we were kids.
Debali, if somebody would get inspired now and say, yes, I'm going to start tomorrow, how to start? What are the daily tricks that you can implement to get better?
You mean in VC?
Yes.
I mean, setting targets definitely very, very important. Getting people, women and people of color on the investment team, very, very important, because so people feel more comfortable when they're approaching you, right? And then, in my view, only capital moves the needle. We can do as much mentoring, as much education, as much talking, but really it's about writing those checks. Even if you start with a small check, even as an angel, you know, I run an angel community where women write small checks, but it all adds up, and it's all about the capital.
Mayra, do you address this issue in your report as well? Do you have some advice there?
Oh, I mean, what we try to do, and I mentioned it in the beginning, right, is like, I think a lot of what that's connected with is like your bias comes from what you see and what you know, right? So we have to change that, and the way we can change it is through, you know, giving founders and amazing women leaders more visibility, right, and make sure that they are seen, you know, and that it becomes the new normal. So you're not even, you know, like kind of your bias doesn't creep up on you because there is no bias, because you're just used to seeing women equally as men on the big stages, you know, in the big funding rounds or whatever, you know, in the news, you know. So what we try to do, at least with Google, because we have obviously what we have is like reach, right? So is to use that to make sure that the founders that we work with actually get like the visibility that they need, and it becomes the new normal. So we don't have to have a female founders conference, but we can have a conference where it's just like equal representation further down.
So there's two things that I would advise as an angel or as a founder. Get a peer group. Discuss, talk, you know, routinely, weekly, monthly. Get more women to tell you you're good, and you know, you don't have that imposter syndrome. And because in Europe we are so spread, you know, it's not like Silicon Valley that everybody's in the same place. So get a peer group in your city and connect. And then second is, I know that we need money, but you can start small. You can be in a syndicate, you can be part of a network, and just get involved, How can you help? Do you have experience? Like me, I was never in this before. I'm 25 years as an operator in consumer goods. But then just adding value, like how can you help? Do you know growth, scale, global reach? You have friends who are in VC and can help. So those connections can be everything for a female founder.
And I just want to add, don't be shy and just ask. There are so many institutions, public institutions, that provide help and support for free. So just come up and ask, and yeah, you will get help for sure.
Bravo. Almost out of time. I think we can grab 3 more minutes just to wrap it up. So, Europe, not as pessimistic as I thought. We have a great opportunity in this economic downturn to position ourselves and to work on our assets. Great time for female leadership and female founders. How to make it happen? What are the next steps in the upcoming months so that we don't just discuss about it, but really make it into the reality?
Well, Dipali, you need to take out your checkbook and go to the pitch
I'm
stage
trying.
right after.
Anybody from Speed Invest here? Just checking.
We should set the KPI that the next Lead Today, Shape Tomorrow, all the percentages have to increase by 10% at least, for example. Would that be realistic? What can we expect in the next year? How fast can we move here?
I think that we are also at a time where we need to make sure our portfolio companies have enough runway. We have to make sure that we have enough capital. There's capital efficiencies. Women tend to be cheap and cheerful, which I love, and stingy, so that's a good thing. But I think we need to make sure that they have enough runway. And in terms of new investing, I think there's always opportunity, right? Because the best companies are born. I have great hope for things that reduce supply chain reliance on the external world. Alternative mobility, alternative and climate, alternative food, SaaS tools that increase operational efficiency. I mean, there's lots of opportunity to invest in, and the best founders will always get funded. It's just that we have to make sure that we take enough meetings with female founders, because sometimes the deck just doesn't tell the story, right? Which is why I always tell female founders, when you're approaching an investor, make sure that you're clear enough in the story with a pitch deck, with a blurb, so there's a higher chance of them actually wanting to meet you. Because a lot of things, when investors are so busy, they just don't have the time to do so many meetings, right? Which is why I think meeting female founders and helping with connections, even if you can't help with capital, who else in my network can help this founder, is very important. But I think it's also a moment to just pause and help our own companies right now, women that have already raised and are running businesses, to make sure they survive the crisis, if there is one.
And
yes.
Bootstrapping is okay. Bootstrapping, getting your company profitable and really making the hard work. So the resilience is probably a good bias for women, because we have to manage so many things. So I see good things. I also think that this is a time for American money to come to Europe because of what's happening in US. It might be actually, I'm trying to drive this thesis about how can we make Portugal the Silicon Valley of Europe. So maybe someone hears me and we have money from Europe coming to Portugal.
Maybe last thing to add, I think there's a conversation on KPIs coming up as well with Anna, who's also a part of the European Women in VC. And I think that's an important conversation to have as well, as an outlook, right? It's are we looking at the right KPIs? Is growth, exponential growth always the one way to go, right? And many women founders actually demonstrate that it's not, and bootstrapping, I think, is a really good keyword for that. So I think also being open, also the investor landscape, and rethinking what we thought to be true for the startup ecosystem for a long time.
Fantastic, and obviously supporting and joining events like Female Founders and the team behind it. Thank you for organizing all of this. Thank you for taking time for this panel. All the insights, a big round of applause for this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.